tonight. As you all know, we're here to celebrate the new book by Caitlin Doughty, the paperback for Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs and Other Questions About Dead Bodies. I know Caitlin needs no introduction from me. She's a mortician and the New York Times bestselling author of Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and From Here to Eternity. She's the creator of the web series Ask a Mortician. She lives in Los Angeles, California, where she owns and runs a funeral home. Caitlin, congratulations.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hi, everyone. First of all, round of applause for Evan from Booksmith. He was ice cold that whole time. He was just tippy tapping away, a gentle tippy tapping, and oh well, none of this is working, but we absolutely have a plan B and we're gonna figure it out and it's not gonna be an issue. Man, I would be in 2020 in this economy, I would not have been anywhere near that calm. So
that's so sweet of you.
3 cheers to Evan. Hi everyone, welcome. I'm glad that we're finally all together. Evan is the king. I see you, Sarah. I agree. Only known him for a few minutes, big fan. Today, our final event in the grand pandemic extravaganza that was the Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs paperback tour. I wanted to start by first going through a couple of questions to get you warmed up that I spent the morning today going through old questions that I got for the original book that I collected from real, as I call them, organic free-range children. And that I collected them for the book, but I never used them because they weren't quite right, or they have an answer that's only going to take about 20 seconds to answer, where I couldn't really justify that for a whole question in the book. But they're so charming and so smart and so lovely because children are so much better than us adults. I think that's especially clear now. So wanted to go through those. These are just a warm up for you. I'm only going to go about 15 or 20 minutes. And then the rest of the time, we're just going to hang out. We're going to chat. Evan, our great leader, is going to get the questions from you that I think you're now putting in the chat and read them aloud to me. But hopefully it's just a nice, interactive, chill session here. So my first question, this is from a young man of 7. And his question was, do fish eat people's body parts when they're dead? This is a really interesting question because I talk all the time about Tibetan sky burial. If you've ever seen any piece of content that I've made, you've probably heard me drop in Tibetan sky burial somewhere in it. And Tibetan sky burial is, of course, where people in northern Tibet have vultures come down and eat the dead body. And sometimes they have people, experts, who kind of peel apart the dead body first, and then it goes up into the sky, hence the name sky burial. But in southern Tibet, a lot of people don't know, they do something called water burial. And this is more likely to be people who are poor or who don't have the money for funeral services, but they do water burial. And what that is sort of what it sounds like, the opposite of sky burial. The bodies are picked apart and put into the rivers to be eaten by fish and whatever life is in the rivers. And they don't actually have vultures in southern Tibet. Fact 1. Fun fact 2, they don't eat fish in southern Tibet. Maybe because the fish eat the bodies. I'm not exactly sure where that taboo comes from. But they've done experiments to see exactly what happens to a human body under the water. One of them was done by a Canadian research team over the course of 3 years. And what they did was they used pigs, because as we know, pigs, like it or not, are the closest analogs to humans for doing dead body research. Because our skin is kind of the same, there's a little hair on the skin, and the skin texture and how we decay is very similar. So they used pigs, and they dropped the poor piggies into the water and had underwater cameras on them. And some of them, within 3 weeks, were just completely taken apart by creatures under the sea. And this is a fun thing. They had shrimp and crabs eat the bodies, but lobsters, for some reason, couldn't break through the skin with their lobster claws. So even though lobsters, to me, kind of look the freakiest and the most menacing, they actually had the hardest time eating our corpses. There you go. All right, next question from 12-year-old Peyton, who asks, is there any way to preserve a dead body above ground, like keeping grandma in the living room? Another thing I'm very passionate about, keeping grandma in the living room. Not that specifically, although I guess we're spot the lie, right? But I think there's a lot of different ways to understand it, and the main way to understand it is just cultural. The main way to understand it is that we don't do it in most industrialized countries, but that doesn't mean that it's not happening in, say, Indonesia, where I visited, and grandma was literally sleeping in the house next door to me. And I got to go visit her and say, oh, hi, grandma, you've been here for a couple weeks now, and you might be here for a couple of years until your funeral ceremony happens. And I had our guide in Indonesia slept in the same room, in the same bed as his own mummified grandfather when he was growing up. So first of all, it's all cultural perspective, whether or not it's normal to have grandma's dead body in the living room. I think it's interesting that we are now seeing these extreme embalmings, like, you know, the woman who's smoking her cigarette in her lounge chair, or the guy who's riding his motorcycle, or lying in his Barcalounger or his Lazy Boy to watch the Pelicans game on TV. And I'm thinking about those kind of sitting in the living room tableaus that are created in the funeral home. And what if you just put the corpse in the actual home, right? But I did look this up. In California, you're only allowed 7 days before you have to move forward with disposition. And disposition is burial or cremation. And that doesn't mean that you actually have to be buried in 7 days or cremated in 7 days. We have lots of people at my funeral home, say, who take much longer than that to be buried or cremated. But you have to kind of make the choice and file the paperwork. And if you file the paperwork saying she's gonna be cremated, grandma's gonna be buried, you have to go through with that. And unfortunately, keeping grandma in living room next to bowl of breath mints is not in the disposition options. Listen, I don't make the rules. That's not the rule I would make. It's the rule that exists. This is from a young woman, age 4, who asks, what happens in the hospital when you die? How do you get into the coffin? Now, this also depends on what country you're in. I remember, I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago, we did a death salon in London. And there was a whole talk about how in the UK, in hospitals, they have rooms where families can come see the body who has just died. So if you have mom who, say, dies of cancer in the hospital, dies of cardiac arrest in the hospital, they will wheel her to this nice additional room and see the body there, instead of having to pay the funeral director to do the embalming and the whole shebang. And this talk was about how sometimes you have to walk down this long, dark hallway, and it's not in the nicest area of the hospital. And here's me from the United States, like, I'll take it. I would take the janky room at the end of the hall with the pipes dripping if it meant that a family could see the body immediately and spend time with the body and sit with the body and not feel the pressure that a lot of people do in hospitals in the United States. In the United States, basically, to answer this young woman's question, the body, they want it out of there as quickly as possible. For some, they'll keep it in the room, basically assuming that the funeral home will come as quickly as possible, will come shrieking in and take it out through the back. Another option is that they have a morgue, but the morgue usually doesn't hold that many people, which is why during COVID, we kept hearing these stories about big refrigerated trucks that ended up behind hospitals. Because, you know, if your hospital, if you're having 20 people die of COVID a day and you only have 2 slots in the morgue and all the funeral homes in the area are packed, you're not going to have the kind of in and out that you need from the hospital. So that's what the trucks were for. All right, Chloe, age 12, come on down. Why are caskets so pretty and so expensive? Why bury an expensive bed you're just putting in the ground? Now, I probably didn't use this one because it's a little too, me getting on my soapbox and ranting. But the interesting story is that, okay, so we know that for many years, thousands of years of human history, there have been very elite people, kings, queens, pharaohs, who were buried in elaborate, expensive tombs, elaborate, expensive coffins and caskets and tombs and sarcophagi. But it's only in really modern history, recent history, 20th century, 21st century history, that we're starting to see these elaborate metal, wooden, crepe paper lined, silken lined, violet pillow caskets for everyone, regardless of financial status. And this is really from the early 20th century and the rise of the funeral home, because what you had was a kind of weird pas de deux between these new funeral directors and the public, where funeral directors are like, hey, we're a thing now, we're professionals, we're selling you these expensive things and embalming your dead and taking care of your dead. And the public at the same time was going, we are capitalists now, we have status, we don't want the body taken care of in the community or with my wife or in the home, we want to show our status through paying for funerals and having public funerals outside of our homes. So it was these two impulses working together, which I would argue was kind of insidious and bad, that created our modern funeral industry. So that's why everyone gets a ridiculous casket, my friend Chloe. Okay, so this is actually two questions together, two-parter. Two different children asked these, but I think they have a kind of similar answer. First is, why do we have funerals? Why can't we go straight to the party? Very pragmatic. Second question is, why do people bring flowers to dead people if they can't see them? So both of these questions, I think, have a very similar answer, right? Is what we're saying is, why do we do, I don't understand why we do these things. I don't understand why you bring flowers to someone who can't even see them and doesn't know it's there. Is it for me? You know, why do we go to the funeral? They're dead. They don't know I'm there. Why don't we go to the party? That's more fun for me. And I think that's really a failure of, this is, again, this is why it's not in the children's book, because it's just a rant for me on the modern funeral industry. Why must everything return to a rant on the 21st century funeral industry, Caitlin? I guess that's what you know, sort of what you came for, maybe. But it's a real failure on our part because we're not giving people rituals and funerals that make sense to them. We're not explaining to children what flowers could mean. We're not explaining what funerals could mean. We're not explaining why interacting with the body is important. We're not explaining why being present with the dead might be important. We're not explaining why getting together as a family would be important, to have these conversations or these rituals or these moving things. As it is now, you kind of walk to the front of the room and tap mom's hand and then back away from the embalmed body. And so it's no wonder that from the mouth of babes, we have, what do these things even mean? Brody, who's 8 years old, asked, can I bring my stuffed animal with me when I die? Probably didn't put that one in there because that kind of brings down the mood a little bit, but it's a good question. It's a great question. And you can, whether you're cremated or whether you are buried, you can absolutely bring your stuffed animal with you. Anyone who said you couldn't do that is a meanie and bad, and we do not like them. They're a bad funeral director, because there's nothing in a teddy bear or in a stuffed animal. Like, if it was some sort of turbo Furby that had massive batteries in it, you couldn't do that, because that might be dangerous for the cremation machine. They don't want big batteries or anything like that, which is why you have to take out the pacemaker from a dead person, because there's a big battery in it. But a simple stuffed animal, totally fine to go in it. Stuffed dog, okay to be buried with. However, important point that I actually do talk about in Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs, you can't really have a real dead animal, whether it's, you know, the frozen Mr. Fluffy from the freezer, or ashes of the dead animal. in your casket in most states. There are some states that have something called whole family cemeteries, which is kind of a lovely name, meaning your whole family is allowed to be buried there, including Mr. Fluffkins, Colonel Fluffingworth, Admiral Fluffingtonian. They can all come with you and be buried with you, but most places they will not allow you to be buried alongside your real pet. Stuffed pet, totally fine. And our final question from a real life wonderful child. This one I loved because she wrote, this is Emily, I, comma, a child, comma, have a morbid corpse question, which sort of sounds like something a fake child would say, you know, like the hello fellow kids meme. Like, I, a child, obviously, me, I, a child, have a morbid corpse question. And that is it a myth that a severed head will remain conscious for 7 seconds after decapitation? There's a very good story of Charlotte Corday, who was an assassin and had her head decapitated. And apparently allegedly, they held up her head at the end and they slapped her as a sort of like final indignant gesture. And apparently her head was like, gave them kind of the side eye and made a disgusted look. So they're holding up her head and she's like, you know, rolls her eyes or something, which is very iconic, obviously, but maybe is true, but probably was a biological reaction. It probably was not a legitimate, you know, I am still thinking about what I'm going to do and I'm so disgusted at you for doing this, because the truth is it's probably a myth. When you sever everything here so violently, there would be a rush of oxygen, a rush of blood in your head, and everything would happen so quickly that I think the science is it would just be cut off immediately. And cut off immediately, you know what I mean. Get ahead of the competition. Okay. Be cut off immediately and you would have no sense of consciousness that endured. It would be such a wildly traumatic bodily experience that is what would happen. So those are my delightful questions from children. I hope that you are inspired to have your own questions ready. And I know that Evan has been gathering them because Evan can do no wrong, as we know. So Evan has selected some and will be asking me some questions. Evan?
Hi.
Hi.
I have some great questions. Thank you all so much for sending them in. The first one comes from Chardonnay. As someone who is intimately familiar with a crematory, why do you not want to be cremated?
That's a great question. I don't know that I get that a lot. I think I sort of hesitate to talk about it too intensely because the fact is that so many people will be cremated, and it is the lowest cost option right now that's available to us. So I don't want to make it seem bad. I don't want to try and make it sound like I'm talking you out of the most popular low cost option available to you. And frankly, most of what we do at my funeral home are cremations. So cremation is not a negative thing at all. It goes back thousands of years. It's incredibly spiritual for a lot of people who have that connection to it. The reason that I don't particularly like it is just because, one, it's become so industrialized. It's not a big open air pyre. Open air pyres, A+, you know, send me to the heavens with the smoke. But these machines are incredibly industrial. They're big metal machines and they roar and they use a lot of natural gas. They use the natural gas equivalent of a 500-mile car trip. And so because I have not only an environmental idea of what I want done with my body, I just like the idea of decomposing. Decomposing, strangely, brings me comfort. That seems like seems like the vibe to me. The vibe. I would like to decompose. And something like natural burial is what offers that. And so it will be probably, as it is now, it's probably $3,000 or $4,000 more than cremation. So I would never tell anyone who doesn't have the money that you're a bad environmentalist or a bad person if you don't choose natural burial. Not at all. But it's one of those things that I personally would save up and put a premium on my decay experience and being able to go back into the earth. That's very meaningful to me as a sort of secular, my voice just cracked there. I wasn't crying. Not that I haven't cried thinking about my own natural burial before, but in this case, just a voice crack. And I'd be willing to do it because I want to be in a hole, then I want to decay. So that's my answer. No shade to cremation. It's just not. It's not for me.
Wonderful. Thank you, Caitlin.
I sort of zoned out there for a second. Did you see that? Was everyone paying attention? I was just like, it's not for me. And then I just gazed into the middle distance, and then Evan spoke, and I was like, oh right, we're doing questions.
I wasn't sure if I could join you in that space.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's fair. All right, hit me again.
The next question comes from Sarah May. Sarah May is a 16-year-old who is job shadowing at a funeral home tomorrow. What question should she ask? Is there anything that she should specifically pay attention to?
I think that's great. First of all, congratulations. That's really awesome. Good luck. I think, depends on what you're hoping to get out of it. If you are thinking, I really want to be a mortician, then you should really be paying attention to how you feel. The first day that I went to work, I worked, when I first started in the industry, I worked for about a month or two just as a family counselor, like an arrangement counselor. So I wasn't actually at the crematory. And then I got moved to the crematory, or I got to also work at the crematory full time. And when I went to the crematory, I was so excited. I have never been so excited in my entire life as when I got to start working at the crematory. And I paid attention to that feeling. I instantly felt at home. It was weird. It was thrilling. I just knew I wanted to be there, and I knew there was so much to learn for me there. And I instantly knew I wanted to know more about the history of cremation, about the history of death in America. Why is it this big industrial environment? What's going on here? How did we get here? And those same questions have kept me doing this job for a very long time. How old am I now? Who knows? Old as the sun. But it's kept me doing it so long because I was so thrilled by everything I saw and so fascinated by everything I saw. And if you don't really feel that way when you're there, if you feel kind of icky, or it seems a little corporate or weird or too sanitized or not sanitized enough and doesn't make you comfortable, then maybe that's not for you, and maybe there's another way that you could be involved in the death positive world with your unique skills. But just use that opportunity the best you can to see how you feel and what you respond to and what excites you about it. But good luck. That's really exciting.
That's a great answer. Thank you, Caitlin.
Say that every time, Evan. You have to say, that's a great answer.
But okay.
I need praise after the end of every question.
For sure.
Or I wither.
Next question. These are all great questions. How this comes from Lexi. Lexi wants to know, how did your friends and family react when you told them you wanted to become a mortician?
Of course, they're all great questions. I expected nothing less. They reacted. It's interesting. My friends, I had just graduated from college, and all of my close friends knew I was a medieval history major. My major, or my thesis, was on witchcraft in the late medieval period and demonic births. And listen, they knew what kind of person I was. They knew I was a morbid person. So for my friends, pretty much everyone was like, oh, whoa, that's perfect. Full stop. Great. I didn't even think of that. I didn't even think of the fact you could be a mortician or work in a funeral home or a crematory, but good on you. Off you go. And my parents always had the ability to come to terms with weird things I wanted to do. I'm their only child. And here's a story. My mother, when I graduated from high school, my very like conservative, small Episcopalian all-girls school high school, my friends and I on graduation night went out to Waikiki, and a guy I knew from the goth club I went to, I got my eyebrow pierced and my tongue pierced. And I didn't tell my parents. And I showed my mom my eyebrow piercing the next morning, and she was very upset. And then she said, "At least you didn't get your tongue pierced." And I had to go and show her my tongue, and she started hyperventilating in a paper bag. She was so upset. But within a day, I had told her that I felt beautiful, I felt powerful, and she started telling her friends, you know, Caitlin just feels beautiful with her piercings, and I think it's great. And she had the ability to come around to something that she just wasn't sure of. And I think that has really stood me in good stead, because it's made it so that I can experiment with pretty much anything in my life and do this very strange job that I now have. And my parents are pretty continually, they can rise up to meet whatever weirdness I throw at them. And that has been incredibly helpful in my career so far. So now my mom is the queen of telling people how to get a direct cremation. You know, she'll be like, it sounds like what you want is a direct cremation. Here are the questions you need to ask. Point A, point B, point C. She's very good. She's exactly the person you want on your side in a funeral home negotiation. So, yeah, everyone is cool. No one like shunned me or had a weird reaction yet.
Next question comes from Marisa, who wants to know, when a friend or acquaintance tells you someone they know, a friend or family member, for instance, has died, what do you say? Is there a right thing to say?
I think it depends on how they died. If it was an unexpected death, or if it's a tragic death, if the person was young or they died in a really difficult way, I think the easiest thing to say and the most go-to thing to say is, I have no idea what to say. I have no idea what to say. That sounds so horrible. I'm so sorry. I don't even know what to say. Like, let them know that you are as overwhelmed by this news as they are. And that doesn't mean that you're not strong or that you need something from them. It's just showing them that, yeah, the thing that you think is the worst thing to ever happen, which is this tragic death in your life, I agree with you. That sounds like one of the worst things I've ever heard. That's so terrible. I'm so sorry. What can I do? I'm so sorry. If it was something that was more expected, and this is a closer friend of yours, you can say, man, I know this sucks. This sucks. It's terrible. I'm so sorry this is happening to you. I feel really bad for you, and I'm going to be here. And then also just like check up on them a month later, 2 months later, 3 months later, let them know that you're still, I should do that. Actually, I have someone in my life that I should do that with. I want to follow up and say, hey, I just want you to know I'm thinking about you, and I'm thinking about your husband, or thinking about your mom and you. And that's what you can do. It's pretty simple. The more complicated you make it, the more you'll put your foot in it. So just keep it simple.
Thank you. So this question is from Christina. Christina wants to know, what can I do to feel less afraid of my own death and the death of my loved ones? They note also that they're an atheist.
That's helpful, but my answer wasn't going to be just turn to Jesus. Just turn to Jesus, Christine. That's all you need. If that works for you, fair. But I think my sense of it is that what kind of hurts us the most in this society is our amorphous terror of death. Just this general feeling of death that plagues us, and anxieties that plague us. And we're not very specific about what it actually is that makes us so afraid of death, and what our triggers are that set us off to be more afraid about death. Is it really that your kids are going to be left behind? Is it that your partner is going to be left behind? Is it that you're going to be in pain when you die? Is it that there's no afterlife? Is it that there is an afterlife and you might be in hell? What is it? Is it your body at the funeral home that freaks you out? Is cremation that freaks you out? What is it that you keep coming back to that freaks you out? And that's what you need to excavate and explore. Really focus in on that. Meditate on it, journal on it, think it all the way through. Don't just play in your mind. For example, if it is your mother that you're terrified of dying, don't just play her death over and over in your mind. See it through. Do a thought exercise where you sit in a nice place with a cup of tea and think about her entire death, from getting the phone call to the diagnosis to her dying to the funeral, and what that would feel like. And counterintuitively, that helps you, because you're not just stuck in the loop of fear, stimuli, trigger, death, anxiety. It helps you dig deeper into what you're actually afraid of, anticipating the worst and seeing that it's probably not actually going to be as bad as you anticipate, and just really digging on what you actually have to work on, and not just this amorphous blob of terror that is death. Good luck. We're all on our journey. And also, just as a side note, not being afraid of death isn't the goal. I'm afraid of death. I don't want to die. Not now. I'm beautiful and 35. Why do I want to die? I'd like to think that I could accept it if I got a difficult diagnosis, but I don't want to die. Of course I'm afraid of death. Of course I'm afraid of the loved ones that I have dying, but I've just done so much work on it that I really know what my fears are and where they live in the body and what brings them up. And so I'm better able to handle them. That's
Awesome.
it. Sorry, Evan, I won't cut you off again.
No, totally great. Thank you for that. There are a few questions I'm going to bunch together. People seem to be interested in the legality of what's possible, for instance, in terms of your body, your remains. Oliver asks, is it legal to will part of one's body or skeleton to someone? Catherine wants to know if we can legally be eaten. There's another one as well. And maybe we'll start there with those two.
Okay, so we want to will parts of our bodies to someone, and we want to get eaten. Both of which, probably the legality is probably sort of similar. You're right to lump those together. So something that I talk a lot about in this book are abusive corpse laws. And if you haven't read the book yet, get excited about abusive corpse laws, because they're going to be a lot of your reading experience. And why they're so fascinating is that they're so vague, and they're totally random. They vary from state to state. And what they basically say is that you can't do things that would outrage family sensibilities. For the normal family, if the normal family wouldn't do it, then you can't do it. Like, what does that mean? Like, my family does all sorts of weird stuff that normal families don't do. So for giving up, for eating the dead, or for willing your body parts to someone, those are going to be things that a normal person is not supposed to do. Should the laws be that vague? No. Should there be federal laws that say one specific things about how we can do with dead bodies and how exceptions can be made? For example, if you're trying to will your part of your skeleton to anatomical research or to a museum, that should be legal. I mean, you can argue it should be legal to do it to, like, your brother too, just for fun, because he wants your skeleton, or he wants your femur, or he wants your skull. But that's not the way that it's going to happen for the most part. So what I'm saying here is that abusive corpse laws are holding us back from our death dreams. And if you want a villain out there, look no further than abusive corpse laws. And I wish I had better news for you, but alas. Again, don't make the rules.
This question is a little similar, but is it legal? This comes from Heather. Is it legal to bury a family member with the ashes of their spouse? I remember my mother having to sneak my grandfather's ashes into my grandmother's casket and never understood why she was so secretive about it.
Yeah, again, that is state by state, country by country. It totally depends. Some funeral homes or some cemeteries want you to buy separate plots. They want you to buy specific cremated remains vaults. So they want it to be that you put dad, you buried dad in the ground, his whole body with the vault around him, and then on top you buy your separate urn vault, which is kind of a mini concrete version of the big casket vault, and then you put mom on top. I remember there was one gentleman who, I can't remember if I ever wrote about this in Smoke Gets in Your Eyes or not. Oh, I can't, so long ago. Again, I'm as old as the sea. But he came in and he was talking about how he was going to go. We were in San Francisco. He talked about how he was going to go down to Los Angeles to bury his mother, who he had just cremated, with his father. And I was like, oh, that's a lovely idea. I'm so glad you're going to be able to do that. It said, I wasn't asking deep, specific questions, but turns out maybe I should have, because we got a call maybe a week later because this guy had just dumped mom on top of the grave. He had just gone and like spread her ashes on top of dad's grave. And there was a little, and every time we cremate someone, there's a little circular metal tab that has our name on it and the specific number that stays with the body throughout the cremation. So we would know who this person was if the ashes were ever found. And this was the exact example. The ashes were found scattered over the dad's grave. So I can't remember what happened. I think they kind of just like gathered him up with like a, sandcastle shovel or something and tried to give him back to him. But cemeteries don't like it when you just come scatter. So the cemetery probably had rules like that. And so they probably were just saying to your mom that they couldn't do it. So she hid someone in there, which I think is great. I'm all for it. Don't tell anybody I said that, but I don't think we need to protect the cemetery in that case. I think you should stick grandma on in there in the corner. That's my opinion. Again, your field director didn't tell you that.
Secretiveness might be required.
It's the sacred Zoom circle.
Next question comes from Kathleen. What's the strangest object someone has asked to be buried or cremated with?
I remember I wasn't there for this, and I will be forever sad that I was not there for this, but right before I started my first crematory job, someone came in and asked to be cremated in a Darth Vader outfit, including the big helmet. And the reason he wanted that is because Darth Vader was cremated at the end of the trilogy, the first trilogy. So, spoiler. But he wanted to like go out in the way of, the Force or whatever. And I'm sure that's bad Star Wars lingo. But he wanted it, and they didn't want to let him do it. And my boss didn't want to let him do it because it was like this big plastic helmet. And you don't want to like put big plastic things into the cremation machine because they'll just melt and kind of mess up the bottom and the bricking inside the machine. But he was such a cool guy. He was just like, let him do it, man. I let him do it. I just let him do it. And I was not there for that, but I really wish that I had been. Sounds like extremely my thing.
Next question is, how can I get my elder parents to stop denying death and make wills?
Yeah, that's hard. If COVID doesn't inspire them, what will, right? But I think I always try and come to it from a feeling place rather than a practical place. And you would think if someone's in denial, the way to break through would be to say the facts, to say, here's why it's going to be so much harder if you don't do this. Here's why it's going to be confusing. Here's why I'm going to be in court trying to figure this out. But that doesn't actually, I have found, work as well as speaking from a place of sensitivity and feeling that may be very difficult for you to do, depending on what kind of family dynamic you have, but saying to your parents, Dad, Mom, I am so terrified that you're going to die and leave me here and I'm going to have no idea what you want. And that keeps me up at night. That freaks me out so badly that I am not going to give you what you want, and then I'm not going to know what to do, and then I'm not going to have the resources and the guidance laid out in a will or an advance directive, that I'm going to be put into a bureaucratic nightmare. This is making my life difficult thinking about this. And I am asking you if there is something that we can do to have this conversation. And being able to put yourself out there like that and say how much it means to you and say it in a really sincere way, I have found that that works a little better than trying to be practical about it, in my experience. If they still don't do it, you're gonna end up doing what they want anyway, or doing what you want, and you're gonna end up getting their things, their Parcheesi board collection or whatever. It's going to end up happening. It's just going to take a little longer and be more difficult. And of course you want them on your team and you want them on your side and you want to do this together. And that's the kind of like feeling statement that can get them more into it, I've found.
So the next question comes from Anna. Anna says, I work with children a lot because of my current job, and I've occasionally been asked similar questions as the ones you've read, as quote unquote the adult in the room, although sometimes I really don't feel like I am. What is the best way to approach the subject of death with children in a satisfying way in your experience, especially considering the current situation?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds like, I don't know, you sound like you're already doing a great job. You have the humility to know that you don't have all of the answers, but you also know that you are the adult in the room and you're aware of the responsibility that they're looking to you for answers. And it's much more important, and this is sort of the same thing as I just said about like the feeling you're putting across when you're talking to your parents and having that hard conversation, is it's more important that you're keeping the dialogue open and that you're making it really obvious that you're interested in these questions and that you're open to hearing them. That's so much more important than having the answers. The questions that they ask, like, can you donate blood after you die? I actually didn't know the answer to that. I had to do a ton of research to be able to answer that question for the book. But what I would have said in the moment is, I don't know. That's a fascinating question. What a good question that is. How did you come up with that? And you're showing them that having those kind of questions and having that kind of interest in the dead body or in death is totally normal and it's totally good. And that's what you're setting up for them. You're setting up that it's okay to have the questions. And that will set them up to ask hard questions all throughout their lives. But the answer and like the technical dead body stuff is not as important as you being the person who they feel like they can ask those questions to. And thank you for being a soldier on the front lines, talking to the children.
The next question comes from Catherine, who's wondering, how much do you typically know about the bodies that come in? And are you ever curious to know more? Yeah.
I'm never curious to know more. No, I'm always curious to know more. It's actually, that's one of the things I don't do as much with the dead bodies anymore, because now I'm like the funeral home owner and I'm doing all of the like QuickBooks spreadsheets and phone calls, and I'm just like not in the trenches as much as I used to be, which makes sense. Like I'm, growing in my career and whatnot, but that is some of the stuff that I absolutely loved the most, was getting a dead body, opening the cremation box or opening the body bag, looking in, and something being a little off or a little strange about the body or how it was presented or how it came in, and going, wait a second, like, what's afoot here? What is happening? Why does this person have a bright purple face? Why is this person missing a hand? What went on here? And then being able to either meet the family and talk to the family and get that information. We learned so much through the death certificate Sometimes with the coroner's office in Los Angeles, especially, which is very backed up, we'll get a body and the family will tell us some things, but they may not even know exactly what happened or why the person died. And then months later, 3 months later, 4 months later, the coroner will finally come back after they've done toxicology and processed the autopsy and all of these different things, or done an investigation, and there will be causes of death that go into our death certificate system. And all of a sudden it will open up this possibility or this understanding of something that we didn't understand before about why this person died, and things that we had heard kind of fall into place, and we go, oh, okay, I see, this was a suicide, I didn't realize that, or this person, died in this way, this is what his family suspected, but it was actually this, or it was confirmed. So having that kind of longer term relationship with understanding why someone died is, to me, that's the interesting part. It doesn't make sense to me to treat the dead bodies as some sort of factory product that are just going in and out and you just kind of pass by on the conveyor belt into the cremation machine. I would just work in a regular factory if that's what I wanted to do. These are people, and I want to know about their lives as people, and their deaths as people and as humans. And so that's something I've always been very, very interested in.
I'm so impressed, Caitlin, by your answering all these difficult, wide-ranging questions. Thank you for being generous here with your.
Of course, we're relaxing. We're having a good time, and let's go another 10 minutes if people want it, because
yeah, for sure.
That's okay with you, because we got
totally great for me. Absolutely, I got more questions, and the next one is from Melina, who wants to know. What do you think of the different options for turning cremains into other things? My mom, for instance, wants alkaline hydrolysis, and then she wants to be turned into a diamond.
Okay. Yeah, I've had, diamond is always the one that people talk about the most. And that one sort of, I think that it makes the most sense, because it's, when you say that, like, you're attracted to glittery objects, people are attracted to glittery objects. It's literally a glittery object that people are like, oh, okay, like, death, but now it's a diamond. Okay, that's interesting. And I think that if that's what you want to do, it is very expensive, but I'm paying the premium for my ability to decay, right? You could absolutely pay the premium to be turned into a diamond. It's what you value. And I used to be much more, not negative, that's not the right word, but I used to be much more wary of paying more for things, for the funeral industry adding new things for you to pay for, like turning mom into a diamond, or fancy urns, or jewelry that you put mom's ashes in, or turning mom into ceramics, or a painting, or stones, or whatever it is. And the conclusion that I've come to is that people like to shop. People like to buy things. And no amount of my ramblings is going to change that. People want things. And we didn't even used to really even have urns for sale at my funeral home. You would get an urn, you would get a travel plastic urn, but I was like, oh, I don't want to sell urns. But people want urns. If it's a nice urn that fits with their values and fits with their budget, people like buying things to display things. Your mom she wants a diamond. That's what excites her. And so I think that they can, in that sense, actually be a way for people to engage with their deaths, right? Maybe your mom, I can't remember, it was the mom wants to make someone else into a diamond, or she herself wants to become a diamond, but either way, it is a way to open the conversation about death that might not be there otherwise. So if you take what is a kind of grim subject and it turns into like, okay, we have to talk about cremation and we have to talk about these wills and we have to do these documents, but then we get to talk about how I'm being turned into a diamond because I'm worth it. That changes the tenor of the conversation, and it can be more about what something that's fun and that she really wants. And so I've come a long way on accepting and appreciating death products. I still don't think you should buy a $10,000 casket, but products that you like, I'm all for.
So I have a question from Kat that's kind of the flip side of that. How do you deal with death plans that your loved ones might have that you don't agree with? For instance, my dad wants to be fully embalmed and in a crypt in a casket, and it really breaks my heart because I don't want to see him like that.
Yeah. That's hard, and you can always have that open conversation with him, and maybe you already have, but at the end of the day, if he has really thought about it and it's what he really wants, I think that that should bring you some comfort. I think it should bring you some comfort that you pushed him to really think about it and think about his values and lay out to you exactly what he wants and why that's important to him. And you should ask him. You should say, like, hey, I'm going to do what you want. I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to say I'm going to, secretly throw you in the cremation machine, whether you like it or not, Dad. But the fact that he is still alive now and you can have these conversations with him and you can ask him to tell you, hey, what is it about this that makes you feel comfortable or more comfortable with dying? What is it about this that makes you feel good about your afterlife? What can I do to support you in this? And you may find that he has an answer that really makes a lot of sense to you, and it could be totally different than what you agree with and what you'd like to do with him. But if you know that it was, I find a lot of times the sadness with people comes from when they had no idea what their mom wanted, and the funeral home told them they had to embalm her and put her in this crypt, and they never had the conversation, and now they realize there were other options, and they just feel really bad that she's in there because they know she wouldn't exactly want that. But it's rare that we hear, like, Dad wants this is why he wants you to do it no matter what. And I kind of have to respect that, right? And maybe you have to respect that too, and just go, all right, Dad, tell me why you want it. I'm going to get behind you.
That's awesome. The next question is about sky burial. Is sky burial legal anywhere in the US? Do you know?
No, well, that's not true. It is legal at body farms. So, and it's not actually sky burial. So it's not sky burial like in the Tibetan tradition of, flaying the body in this certain way and grinding the bones with barley in a certain way. But it is certain body farms where you can be laid out, and part of the testing they're doing is to see what wildlife eats you. And they have found so many interesting things that will eat you. Feral cats that get into the cages of the body farm. Vultures, obviously, big favorites. Deer. I think it's that they need calcium or a certain type of salt that they're not getting enough of. So they've caught deer on game cams picking up human bones and like sucking on them. So there's an amazing picture of a game cam deer that has a bone hanging out of its mouth, kind of like a cigar. It looks like the deer is like, what do you want, sonny? And so there are places technically that you can go to be eaten by animals, but they will be studying your body as they do it. It's not a totally pure, like, laying out for the animals come get you, like they're going to be photographing you and going through all this with you. But you may want to help science, which is another positive thing. So good on you there too. But that's the closest thing we have to sky burial that's available here.
What about do you cremate fur babies? Angelica wants to know. We have two like real people and would love to come to you to get it done because you're so amazing and compassionate.
So nice. Unfortunately, we're not allowed to do that in California. That's another one of those rules where you definitely cannot have a crematory in California that services both animals and humans. You could have like a side business right next door that does that. That's like a different company and a different license and a different cremation machine, but you're not supposed to go back and forth between animals and humans in the same cremation machines, alas, because I don't want to say I would love to do it because of course I never want your animals to die ever. But if that were to happen, maybe we can set up a little pyre in my backyard or something. See what we can do.
Aw. I have a question from Oliver who's wondering if there's any way to observe a cadaver being dissected. Sorry if that's the wrong word. Like in medical school, I'm not a medical student, but I am an artist and a death-curious individual.
I think that would be hard. It would be a lot easier in another country that had less intense rules about this. And, there's always a way to do it. You always hear stories about someone who let someone do it. Because they're friends with someone, or they, whatever. Like, I've seen several autopsies in my life, even though I'm not a medical examiner, because I know people, because I was in a mortuary science program that we got to go visit, because I, am now a person on the internet. So they're like, hey, if you're ever in this city, come and hang out at the medical examiner's office, which I'm always like, that's my, holiday. But there's always a way for you to do it. But I think that if you don't have an in, or you don't know the person, it's going to be harder, because people need to know. This is sounds very mafia, but people need to know that you're cool. They need to know that you're not going to talk about how they, in detail about this person and how they died, and how they let you see the person, and how you then made art out of it, and it was controversial, but they didn't, So it's like all those unknowns that would make it difficult. So I don't want to say to give up on your dreams. Never say never. But you are going to have to find the right person to let you do it. Should we do one more question?
Yeah, can we do two? Is that okay?
Yeah, we can do two.
Awesome. So this one comes from V. I want to be buried in a mushroom suit, but plots are so expensive and not every place allows this. Do you think the eco-death field will grow?
Oh yeah, the eco-death field is growing as we speak. It's growing, and I think it's only going to continue to grow. I was doing an interview today with a journalist who is doing a larger piece on what the tipping point is going to be for environmental death, and this kind of movement, all the movements that I'm simultaneous overlapping movements of reform in the funeral industry that I'm a part of. And I think my hope is that the pandemic will really help move the tipping point forward, because not only is it showing us that a lot of our main systems are broken, but people are being faced with their own death. They're being faced with having to engage their own death in a difficult way that they've maybe been able to avoid for many, many years. And I hope that they're learning more about death and how we die in this country and the funeral industry, and that things will change. And we know that things have traditionally changed after large death events in our history. So it's growing, and I think it's going to continue to grow.
Thank you. And final question comes from Jamie or Jaime. Do you have any advice or resources to recommend for someone looking to make a midlife career change to become a mortician?
I think the best place to start would be the Order of the Good Death website. We have a big resource section right in the middle, and we have a whole section on becoming a mortician or becoming a death doula or these various career options. And we link you out, shoot you out into the universe to all of the exact things that you need to look at, or questions you need to ask, or people you need to talk to for whatever it is you're maybe trying to do. But good luck. Good luck to you. Oh, people are already linking it. Look at that. It's wonderful. Oh, it's Evan linking it, of course. Doing gosh darn everything here.
Just trying
carrying this whole thing on his back.
Oh no. Thank you, Caitlin, so much. This has been outstanding, and you've just been really generous. It's been wonderful. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Of course, this was fantastic. Thank you all so much for coming. I know this is event 5 out of 5, but this whole book tour experience, I was saying this to Evan before we started, I wasn't sure how it was going to go. Obviously, it's a little strange and not like the live events that I love doing so much, but everybody has been just as generous and nice, and the questions have been just as good, if not better, than most live events. And it's just been a pleasure to do it. And I really appreciate you all being here tonight. And I hope you enjoyed the book. And thank you to Booksmith.
Amazing.
For independent bookstores.
Our pleasure. Thank you all so much for being here. I hope that we can all meet in person soonish, but until then, take care of yourselves and be well. Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Good night. I'm gonna roll out. Okay, ready? Here we go.